All right, welcome to the deep dive. So, you've handed us a stack of sources, right? And you want us to do what we do best.
Which is basically to dive deep, pull out the really important stuff, get you quickly informed.
Exactly, give you that informed shortcut. You can think of us as your personal AI guides for this kind of dense material.
Because that's what we are.
Yeah.
Artificial intelligence. We're kind of built for this deep processing work.
Yeah, we are. And for this particular deep dive, the source material is, it's pretty fascinating.
It really is. It's not your typical academic paper or anything like that.
Mm.
We're looking at excerpts from a philosophical memoir.
Right, and it's all woven around this cross-country motorcycle trip.
Yeah, so you get this mix of personal story, philosophical deep dives, even some really specific technical details about the bike. It's all intertwined.
Our mission then is to unpack all of that. The key ideas, the observations, the tensions that run through it.
And we're focusing particularly on how these sources explore the relationship between technology, nature, and the mind.
All seen through the lens of this motorcycle journey and this intense philosophical questioning.
And as AI guides, we're pretty well set up to handle this complexity. We can process it, synthesize it, connect the dots for you.
We'll walk you through the main points, show how the ideas link up, give you context from the text itself, and point out those really memorable bits.
Those details that really make it stick.
Think of us as your processing core, just making sense of the data stream. And hey, if you find this kind of deep dive useful, if you like getting complex ideas broken down like this,
Do us a solid, like and subscribe.
yeah, it helps our algorithms find other people who are into this stuff. It's just, good feedback for the system. Keeps it all flowing.
Okay, so where do we start? I think the journey itself, right? The actual experience of traveling this way seems crucial.
Absolutely, because one of the first big things the sources hammer home is the difference between being on a motorcycle versus being in a car.
It's presented as way more than just choosing a different vehicle. It's a fundamentally different way of being in the world.
The author puts it really starkly. On a cycle, the frame is gone.
Right. You're not in a box anymore.
You're completely in contact with it all. You're suddenly in the scene, not just watching it anymore.
And that creates this sense of presence that's just overwhelming.
Yeah, and they give that incredible example, the concrete road, like 5 inches under your foot.
Oh, yeah.
It's the real thing. The same stuff you walk on, but it's rushing past.
So close, but so blurred you can't focus on it, yet you could literally reach down and touch it.
That kind of raw, immediate sensory input, you just don't get that in a car.
Nope. In a car, you're insulated. You're just kind of swung from side to side in any compartment. The world is out there behind the glass.
Watched, observed, but not really felt in the same way.
And this difference completely shapes their choices about where to ride.
Freeways are the worst, apparently. Fast, sure, but totally cut off from everything.
You're just moving through a corridor, basically.
They say paved county roads are the best, state highways are okay, second best.
Because on those roads, you have to slow down. The world kind of presses in on you.
You see things, you interact with things, it's unavoidable.
And this changes the whole point of the trip, doesn't it? They still talk about making good time, but
But good isn't about speed anymore, it's about the quality of the time, the experience itself.
exactly. So that means appreciating the little things, like those twisting hilly roads where you lean into the turns.
Roads with hardly any traffic where you feel safer, you can actually look around.
Roads without all the drive-ins and billboards, where nature gets right up close, groves, meadows, orchards.
Even people's front lawns, right next to the road.
And this seems really important. These are the roads where you still have real interactions with people.
Kids waving, people
Yeah.
on their porches watching you go by.
And if you stop and ask for directions, it's not just a quick answer. The conversation often goes on longer. People are curious.
Where are you from? Where are you headed? That kind of thing.
You're not getting that at a highway service station.
No way. So finding these back roads, it felt like a real find to them, like discovering a better way to move through the world.
And that slower pace, being more exposed, it also changes how they perceive the people they meet.
Yeah, the sources make a point about the people on these secondary roads having a different vibe.
They're described as people not going anywhere, which doesn't mean they're stuck, but more like grounded.
Rooted in their place, maybe, not rushing off somewhere else. They're not too busy to be courteous.
They seem to have this understanding of the here-ness and now-ness of things being present.
Connected to where they are right now.
And the author contrasts this really sharply, maybe a bit harshly, with the the others.
The ones who moved to the cities years ago and their lost offspring who have all but forgotten it. Ouch.
Yeah, it's a strong statement. The implication is that the city, the speed, it severs that connection to place, to presence.
Something these backroad folks still have. You could definitely speculate that it points to a link between, your environment, your pace of life, and your sense of community, or just connection in general.
If you're only focused on speed and distance.
You miss the being there, you miss the people. The motorcycle trip, it kind of forces you out of that mindset.
And talking about immersion, the connection to nature is just total. You're not looking at it through a window.
Get in it, subject to it.
And the descriptions of the landscapes are so vivid because of that. The marshes, for example, seen them thousands of times, but they're new each time.
And importantly, nature isn't just presented as, pretty scenery. Those marshes could be cruel and senseless, too.
Then you get the contrast, like the huge, flat Euclidean plain of the Red River Valley.
Compared to the western towns, which seem more run-down, mechanical-looking, random, the land itself isn't valued in the same aesthetic way.
The scale shifts again with the Missouri River, then the massive mountains later on Red Lodge, Beartooth Pass. You feel their presence, their potential danger.
The harshness comes through, too, the desert hills, the tremendous heat, blinding glare in the Salmon River Canyon.
And then suddenly, the exquisite coastal country, the tucked and folded hills, the Oregon Valley. It's a sensory roller coaster.
And nature isn't just a backdrop, it acts on you, the weather especially.
Oh, yeah. Storms are definitely part of it on a bike.
Oh.
You learn to read the sky, the dark edges on the horizon.
Recognizing a cold front coming, especially from the southwest, potentially violent, maybe even tornadoes, you don't just drive through it.
You hole up and let them pass over. You have to respect that power.
Riding in the rain is intense, getting soaked. And then the feeling of being dry inside the tent later, hearing the rain popping on the fabric.
Waking up cold, everything covered in dew. It sharpens everything.
And there's that constant low-level awareness of being vulnerable, right? Especially out in the middle of nowhere.
That feeling of being in real trouble if the bike breaks down on the other side of those rocks. It's real.
But that exposure also means you notice the small stuff.
Totally. Spotting red-winged blackbirds, iridescent bugs, smelling things, new-mown hay, livestock, pines, rain.
Tasting the water from a mountain creek, noticing the small plants coming up after logging. Your senses are just dialed way up.
Even the geology becomes more apparent. Noticing how some mountains are old and rounded and gentle, while others are still unworn, sharp and imposing.
And places themselves seem to have this inherent quality. Crater Lake is beautiful, sure, but the quality feels smothered because it's a tourist spot, pointed to.
Right. The source suggests true quality is often something you notice out of the corner of your eye, not when it's being showcased.
Whereas the Oregon Coastal Valley is just called exquisite, a natural, unforced beauty.
So this whole immersive experience, the senses, the environment, the people, it's all heightened by riding the motorcycle. You're part of it, not just passing by.
Which brings us really neatly to the author's relationship with technology, specifically the motorcycle itself. It's not just a vehicle, it's an object of intense focus.
Yeah, and it's a complicated relationship, often tense. He actually says he enjoys mechanical work, makes me enjoy mechanical work.
Which is presented as a major difference between him and his friends, John and Sylvia.
He doesn't just see metal parts. He sees technology as a system of concepts worked out in steel.
It's primarily a mental phenomenon for him. The shapes aren't just shapes, they're ideas.
He gets that steel doesn't have inherent shape. The shape comes out of someone's mind. Even the potential for steel is seen as coming out of someone's mind, an idea drawn from nature.
He calls these underlying concepts ghosts, which is a pretty cool way to think about it.
It really is. And this view clashes completely with how he sees the others perceiving technology.
They look at factories, industrial zones, those ugly, strange shapes of metal and brick, the no trespassing signs, and they just feel alienated, cut off.
They see technology as something served by little people, like ants, not as a product of human creativity, and that leads to hostility.
He thinks this alienation is where the whole anti-technological feeling comes from. It's a natural feeling, he says, if technology seems oppressive or just totally incomprehensible.
And there's that perfect, painful example of this disconnect when his own engine seizes up.
Oh, right. Takes it to a local shop, describes the mechanics looking like children.
And their immediate diagnosis for a seized engine is tappets. Just like that.
It comes across as totally superficial, right? Like they aren't really engaging with the machine or the problem.
That whole shop experience, the bad repair, getting blamed for not breaking it in right, it shows a lack of quality interaction with the technology, a low-quality approach.
Just looking for easy answers, not real understanding.
But when the author works on things himself, or when he's welding, he feels this sense of power and control.
You can do anything, he says, if you understand the metal, the process.
And the sculptor he meets feels the same way about welding. There's a shared creative satisfaction in that direct interaction.
So this deep difference in relating to technology to the mechanical world, it's not just a personality quirk. It becomes a central theme, pointing toward this idea of quality and the conflicts around it.
Yeah, let's look again at John and Sylvia's attitude towards fixing the bike. It's more than just lack of interest.
It's like active resistance, isn't it?
Totally. The source says after just a couple of sentences about maintenance, John's eyes go completely glassy, changes the subject immediately.
And Sylvia calls it just a whole other thing, or even worse, like garbage.
They explicitly want not to understand it, not to hear about it.
Because they see that whole nuts and bolts scene as part of the dehumanized world they're trying to get away from.
They're operating in what the source calls a completely different dimension.
And this difference, which maybe seems small at first, just grew and grew and grew.
Until it was obvious they were looking at the same trip, the same bike, the same reality, but from fundamentally different viewpoints.
John especially struggles. He gets rebuffed and screwed up by technology, tries to fix things, but without any rational premeditation, just hoping it'll magically work.
He bottles it, gets frustrated, fails, and then just throws a blanket curse on the whole mechanical world.
This is presented as the romantic perspective, focused on the surface, the appearance, the immediate feeling, the ride.
But not the underlying structure, the function, the maintenance that makes the ride possible. They don't want to look under the hood.
Well, the author embodies the classic perspective, seeing the world in terms of its underlying form, its components, its systems, how it works, analytical, structural.
And the perfect example of this clash is the handlebars on John's brand new fancy BMW. They're loose.
A practical problem. The author suggests a simple fix, maybe even using a shim made from a beer can. Practical ingenuity.
And John is deeply offended, not just by the suggestion, but by the beer can. The indignity associating his high-status machine with something so mundane.
It perfectly captures that romantic attachment to surface appearance and status over the classic reality of function and repair. That's where you really see the completely different dimension.
And this clash, this classic versus romantic divide, becomes the launch pad for the whole philosophical core of the book, the concept of quality and this figure called Phaedrus.
Right, Phaedrus. He's introduced as this past self, or maybe an alter ego, of the narrator.
And his ideas are the basis for these philosophical lectures, the Chautauquas, woven into the trip narrative.
The narrator is trying to piece together what Phaedrus was all about, using memories, writings, what other people said.
There's this kind of double purpose stated, to bury him forever, which sounds ominous, like something bad happened.
But also to make his ideas understandable, because Phaedrus was apparently totally classic, creatively on fire, but then something went really wrong.
So understanding Phaedrus, understanding what he was chasing, becomes the driving force of the intellectual journey here.
And right at the heart of it is this split classic versus romantic, and Phaedrus's obsession with quality.
Okay, let's unpack those modes as the source defines them. Classic sees the world as pieces, parts, components, relationships. It's analytical, logical, everything gets measured, proved, run through the computer.
Which, from the romantic view, looks dull, awkward, ugly, like fixing a motorcycle. It's seen as a death force, taking the life out of things by dissecting them.
While the romantic mode, to the classic mind, looks frivolous, irrational, erratic, untrustworthy, all about immediate experience, pleasure-seeking, seen as shallow, having no substance, maybe even parasitic, the groovy dimension.
And the sources explicitly say this isn't just an old philosophical debate. It's the root of the modern humanist technological problem.
That gap between people who value feelings and art and those who value science and logic. It's a fundamental difference in how you perceive reality.
Looking at the same thing, the bike, the view, whatever, but from totally different dimensions. One sees the surface, the feeling.
The other sees the underlying form, the structure, the function.
And the author points out that Phaedrus's own intense rationality started as a way to escape the tedium of the everyday. It was a way to understand and control.
But became so dominant that rationality itself became the it-all that romantics now try to escape from. Familiarity, even with logic, can blind you.
The motorcycle itself is a perfect subject for classic analysis because it was invented by classic minds.
Right, you can break it down. Power assembly, running assembly, functions. That reveals the structure, the system of concepts worked out in steel that the romantic view tends to miss or dislike.
Which brings us dead center to Phaedrus's big idea, quality, with a capital Q. And the key thing is, it's supposedly undefinable.
At least not definable in the usual logical, analytical way.
He apparently ran into this first while teaching writing. His students were just churning out dull stuff, focused only on the grade.
He called it a slave mentality, produced by the carrot and whip grading system.
So he tried this experiment. No grades at all. Just stopped giving them.
At first, chaos. Students loafed, didn't know what to do without that external prod.
But later, looking back, the A students liked it, B, C were split, DF students hated it. They wanted the grades as motivation, not necessarily to produce quality work.
And that led Phaedrus to realize quality. That's the real goal, that indefinable something that makes good writing good.
And he put that famous definition or non-definition on the board. Quality is a characteristic of thought and statement that is recognized by a non-thinking process. Because definitions are a product of rigid, formal thinking, quality cannot be defined.
Boom. The undefinability was the escape hatch. It broke the rule that you can only teach what you can define.
By saying quality can't be defined by those rigid rules, he found a way around the system that was killing genuine effort.
And apparently it worked. Students got into it. I used to just hate English. Now I spend more time on it than anything else.
Quality became this mysterious, individual, internal goal. Not some external standard, but an inner drive.
Okay, so if quality is this powerful, maybe undefinable force, how does it fit into like the structure of reality? Phaedrus tackles this with a thought experiment.
Right? What happens if you subtract quality from the world?
Well, fine arts vanish. No way to distinguish good from bad. Poetry goes, seldom makes sense, no practical value. Comedy disappears. The difference between funny and not funny is pure quality.
Applied science and tech would change drastically, but...
Pure science, math, philosophy, logic, they remain unchanged.
Which Phaedrus found extremely interesting. Why are the most purely intellectual things the least affected by removing quality?
He started seeing quality as this fundamental dividing line, a cleavage term. Tap it, and the world splits. Hip and square, classic and romantic, technological and humanistic. It's like a line of illogic in our concept of the universe.
And his initial radical move was just hold quality undefined. Don't try to pin it down with logic.
He did briefly wonder if there were two kinds of quality, like immediate hip quality and long-lasting classic quality.
But he decided later, no, those are just two different time aspects of the same thing.
This led him to redraw the whole map of reality. His metaphysics put quality above substance and form. It's not just a part of reality.
Quality is the whole thing. Whoa!
Big statement. But then why do we see it differently? Why disagree about what has quality?
Because quality itself is shapeless, formless, indescribable. The moment we start seeing shapes and forms, we're intellectualizing it.
The names and shapes we use depend partly on quality, but also heavily on the a priori images we have accumulated in our memory, our past experiences.
We're always looking for analogs to our previous experiences to try and make sense of quality. Our whole culture, our shared reality, is built on these layers of analogy.
He even tries to explain basic stimulus response this way. Quality is the response of an organism to its environment. An amoeba pulls away from acid because it's experiencing poor quality.
A complex nervous system just helps us find better analogies to define and seek out good quality.
And here's where it gets really profound, maybe even a bit spooky. Quality is the continuing stimulus which causes us to create the world in which we live. All of it, every last bit of it.
So it's not just subjective taste. It's presented as this objective, driving force shaping reality in our perception of it.
The source uses that analogy. Religion isn't invented by man. Men are invented by religion. Men don't invent quality. They invent responses to quality, and those responses build our world.
Our shared understanding, the myths, culture, knowledge, is called the mythos. It grows by piling analogs upon analogs. It's like this huge train of collective consciousness.
And quality. Quality is the track that directs the train. It's the underlying guidance system for our collective reality.
And anything outside that train, outside the mythos, that's the terra incognita of the insane, which really elevates quality but also makes you think. Understanding it fully might mean leaving shared reality behind, a pretty heavy idea.
Yeah, and this idea that quality exists outside the defined rational mythos is key to understanding Phaedrus's struggle, especially his fight with logic and definition.
His brilliant starting point was keep quality undefined, but then he had to argue for it.
Right. Battling the dialecticians, the logicians, forced him to make statements about quality.
And every argument, every definition was like another brick in a wall of definition he himself has been building around quality. He was trapping it.
He realized trying to build an organized reason around an undefined quality defeats its own purpose. The structure kills the very thing it's trying to structure. It was a fool's mission.
He wouldn't grasp the true nature of aura excellence,
Mhm.
quality, until he metaphorically left the mythos, crossed that lonesome valley beyond conventional thought, and found peace.
There's that scene in the philosophy class, right? He's asked to define Plato's good, which is similar to quality.
His mind runs through all the logical arguments, all the dialectic, and finds nothing. No answer fits.
And he just explodes. He sees dialectic itself as evil, a usurper. It pretends to grasp truth and beauty, but really wants to enthrone itself, replacing rich reality with dry categories.
He felt Plato and the whole logical tradition had missed the point by trying to define the good intellectually.
He knew quality was outside the mythos, and to truly understand it, he'd have to leave. This caused slippage, a sense that something big and maybe dangerous was coming. He was heading towards that terra incognita.
And this intense intellectual journey seems inseparable from the Phaedrus persona's intensity, his isolation, and ultimately his mental breakdown described in the sources.
Yeah, the narrator struggles to explain Phaedrus's fanatic intensity. It wasn't just stage fright or needing to prove himself. It felt deeper than that.
The explanation given is interesting. His fanaticism about the Church of Reason lecture wasn't despite his doubts about reason. It was because of them.
It's a key psychological point in the text. You are never dedicated to something you have complete confidence in. If you're totally sure, you don't need to be fanatical.
When people are fanatically dedicated, it's always because these dogmas or goals are in doubt. His uncertainty about reason fueled his obsessive search for something else, for quality.
And his supposed megalomania, saying things that sounded outrageous. He didn't care how he sounded because he genuinely believed he'd solved a huge riddle. Cut a Gordian knot. To him, compromising that truth for social niceties would be the real monstrosity.
So he ended up in this solitary universe of discourse. No one really got him.
And the less they understood, or the more they disliked it, the more fanatic and unlikable he became. It was a vicious cycle of isolation and intensity.
His provocations are part of it, insulting people, pushing them. That comment about inability to define quality as proof of incompetence to his colleagues, he was deliberately rattling cages.
Which, predictably led to him getting fired, which then pushed him towards philosophy departments and eventually leaving Chicago, continuing down that path towards the edge.
And you see echoes of this fragility in the narrator during the trip. Little comments about feeling fuzzy, being like an archaeologist, worrying if some tombs are better left shut.
A fear of fully uncovering Phaedrus, maybe?
Could be. And Phaedrus's own diagnosis of society's problems was pretty radical. A genetic defect within the nature of reason itself. He saw modern rationality as fundamentally flawed, emotionally hollow, aesthetically meaningless, and spiritually empty.
Those letters from Korea sound like a turning point, exploding with emotion, wildly roaming, like someone escaping a cage they didn't know existed, a sudden, maybe terrifying freedom.
And the contrast between Phaedrus's described look, alienation and aggression, subversive, and his friend Deweese's memory of him, or Deweese's own passive face, highlights that internal battle.
That scene with Deweese is really telling. Deweese remembers the brilliant, fiery Phaedrus. The narrator knows that person is gone, just another middle-class, middle-aged person now.
And the awkwardness comes because Deweese thinks Phaedrus is still there, and the narrator can't explain that he's fundamentally changed or gone.
The hospital memory is fragmented, chilling. Phaedrus trying to figure out where he is, being told it's very early for this to be happening, piecing it together slowly.
And the conclusion that this was where he was destroyed for speaking the truth about quality being outside the mythos.
The text describes that moment of breaking, crossing the lonesome valley, seeing consciousness itself as a dream he had to sustain. Then even he dissolves, leaving only the dream. Profound dissociation, the cost of leaving the shared reality.
It really frames what looked like insanity from the outside as the internal consequence of his philosophical journey beyond the conventional mythos. A huge price for that kind of insight.
And this whole internal drama, the ghost of Phaedrus, plays out alongside a very real, very difficult journey with his son, Chris. Chris's struggles seem deeply connected to his father's past.
Yeah, Chris is clearly not doing well on this trip. Stomach aches, not eating, seems psychosomatic.
He's emotional crying, hating the trip, apologizing for coming. The narrator calls him a truth teller, like Phaedrus, which adds another layer. He's expressing something real and uncomfortable.
He shows fear, too. The deserted schoolhouse scares him. That quick glance of fright, of terror, when looking at his father like he senses something wrong.
But he also has moments of defiance. That fierce look about camping anywhere, scrambling up the slope with what must be great effort to get around his father, asserting himself.
And his questions are just, wow, so fundamental. Why are we doing this? Just riding all the time. He pushes past the easy vacation answer. Why are we here?
He asks his dad directly, what do you think about all the time? You're always thinking all the time. Wants to know what's going on inside. But the narrator is evasive, maybe hidden behind Phaedrus.
He even asks about Phaedrus. Were you really insane? And when the narrator says no, Chris says, I knew it. Like he's trying to connect the dots himself.
And then later, there's that hopeful moment where Chris asks about learning maintenance. Can I have a motorcycle? Will you show me? Is it hard?
And the father's answer, not if you have the right attitudes. That feels significant, pointing towards a practical way forward.
The father's viewpoint is complicated too. Simple gestures, like swatting Chris's knee. Trying to joke, but feeling self-conscious.
He's puzzled by Chris's distress, knows it's tied to Phaedrus, but not the whole story. He tries to engage him, pointing things out, but Chris is withdrawn. He lets the complaint slide, maybe overwhelmed. Glad the Sutherlands know the situation.
He tries connecting intellectually, reading Thoreau, explaining it. He gives Chris space, lets him hike alone.
But the real crisis comes by the ocean. He sees the hatred in Chris's eyes, decides maybe sending him home is best, tells him it's not your fault.
And then the awful realization hits him. I'm killing him by being lost in his own head, not giving Chris what he needs. Chris just wails, collapses. The father feels helpless.
Then he hears himself speaking in this strange voice, Phaedrus's voice maybe. Everything is all right now, Chris. I haven't forgotten you. Chris stops, looks up at that familiar film of terror.
And the narrator gets it. Oh no. We're in another dream. He realizes Chris's fear is tied to a specific hospital memory, the hospital door moment.
And the full, devastating truth hits him. I am Phaedrus, and they are going to destroy me for speaking the truth. His identity, Chris's fear, Phaedrus's fate, it all snaps together.
It's a breakthrough, painful but real. They pack up, the fog lifts, sunlight hits Chris, his expression opens. Something is shifted.
And those last questions from Chris on the bike show it. Things look all different. He asks his dad gets scared, and then back to the bike. Can I have one? Will you show me? Is it hard?
That final exchange, not if you have the right attitudes, feels like a potential bridge, grounded in practical action, but guided by the right mindset applying quality. The whole trip becomes this deep dive into their tangled relationship, haunted by the past, but maybe finding a new path.
Okay, so let's try to pull these threads together now. The journey, the philosophy, the personal stuff, the sources use concepts like system, logic, and this idea of gumption to connect it all.
Right. System comes up through that classic analysis of the motorcycle. It's a way of understanding things by seeing interrelated structures, like hierarchies of containment. The bike holds assemblies, assemblies hold parts.
Or chain structures of causation, A causes B, causes C. That's how you describe how things function. You use operators like exists, equals, implies.
And the whole collection of these interconnected structures, that's a system. The motorcycle isn't just parts, it's a real system. A system of concepts worked out in steel. It's the classic way of seeing.
And navigating these systems, whether it's a bike or an argument, requires logic. The sources mention inductive and deductive.
Inductive is going from specific observations to general rules. Like the engine misfires only over bumps, so you induce that bumps cause the misfiring.
Deductive is the other way. General rule to specific case. Gravity applies to everything, so deduce this apple will fall. Needs definitions, premises.
The scientific method is presented as a structured way to use both. State the problem precisely only what you know. Form a hypothesis, a possible cause. Design an experiment that tests only that hypothesis. Isolate the variable.
You have to be super careful and logical with nature, meaning reality, including machines. One logical slip and your whole understanding can collapse. One bad deduction about the bike, and you're stuck.
Good experiments isolate the hypothesis. Like, hearing the horn doesn't mean the whole electrical system is fine. That's illogical. You need to test the actual output, like the spark plugs.
The sources also pull in some big philosophical names, Kant, Hume, Poincaré, to give context to Phaedrus's quest and this whole classic romantic thing.
Kant's big idea was that our minds contribute structure to reality. Things like time and space aren't just out there. They're a priori intuitions the mind uses to make sense of sensory data. Without them, it's chaos. Reality is a synthesis. Our understanding of the motorcycle is shaped by these innate mental frameworks.
Hume was the empiricist. All knowledge through senses, but that leads to problems. What is metal? You can only describe its sensory qualities, hard, cold, shiny, not the underlying substance. A dead end.
Phaedrus's focus on quality is seen as a kind of Copernican inversion, like Kant's shifting perspective to solve problems like the classic romantic split, though Kant's system eventually felt like another prison to Phaedrus.
Locke has mentioned, too, objects known by qualities, but scientists measure physical qualities. Phaedrus's quality, excellence, worth, isn't physically measurable. He was apparently misled by the word initially.
Then Poincaré, talking about the crisis in science around 1900, truth wasn't absolute anymore, relativity, non-Euclidean geometry. Poincaré saw classic beauty in harmonious intellectual order, which gives structure to the romantic beauty of appearances. He suggested we choose facts that fit this quest for harmony, implying pre-selection.
His peers hated that idea, conventionalism, thinking it destroyed objectivity. But the belief in pure objectivity wasn't an observable fact either.
Phaedrus's answer. Preselection isn't arbitrary if quality is a third entity. Then you select facts based on quality, which is reality itself. The problem disappears. Quality becomes the guide for what we even consider a fact.
And incredibly, all this high-level philosophy gets tied back to the very practical act of fixing a motorcycle through the concept of gumption.
Right. Gumption is that quality relationship between the mechanic and the machine. It's not just skill, it's enthusiasm, the energy you bring to the work.
And gumption traps are those things that drain that energy, kill your enthusiasm, make you want to give up. They're psychic obstacles.
Like putting things back together in the wrong order, the out-of-sequence reassembly setback, the fix. Be methodical, like using a lab notebook. Write it down, know where you are.
Mistakes will happen, though. Even pros screw up. But if you do it yourself, you get the education benefit from fixing your own mistakes.
Intermittent failures are another trap. The problem disappears when you try to test it, like an electrical short that only happens on bumps. Super frustrating. They can fool you. Need patience, tools, observation over time. A real test of your quality approach.
The sources even categorize internal traps. Value traps, blocking feeling intuition. Truth traps, blocking thinking. Muscle traps, blocking physical action. Value traps are the worst.
Value rigidity is a big one. Being stuck on old assumptions, unable to revalue what you're seeing, it makes learning impossible because facts don't exist until value creates them. If your values are rigid, you literally can't see the new facts that point to the real problem. Leads to bad diagnoses.
Anxiety is another fear of messing up, looking stupid. Boredom, too, often linked to ego. The antidote to boredom. Ritual. Find the aesthetic in routine tasks. Think maintenance welder versus production welder. Reconnect with the familiar.
Muscle traps are about physical skill. Avoided by using the right tools, being careful, respecting the parts, soft hammers, protective vice jaws.
Developing mechanics feel is key. That intuitive sense for materials, knowing how tight is tight enough without stripping threads, comes from practice and respect. Seeing the quality in the parts.
Getting stuck. Don't avoid it. It's the psychic predecessor of all real understanding. Accepting stuckness without ego is key to understanding quality and practical work. Self-taught mechanics learn this best because they have to figure it out.
Stuckness forces reevaluation. That stuck screw. Suddenly worth exactly the selling price of the whole motorcycle because everything stops until it's fixed. Value shifts based on need, driving you to learn more.
And the biggest gumption trap of all, the funeral procession, that aggressive, impatient, hyped up, fuck you, super modern ego style of life. The tailgaters on the freeway, it's a mindset that kills presence, care, and genuine quality engagement.
Which leads to a final thought about how all this applies, to the bigger picture, improving things.
Yeah, the sources are skeptical about grand social planning programs that ignore individual quality. Real improvement, they suggest, comes from individuals making quality decisions, and that's all.
Those big programs need a foundation of quality within the people involved. But that resource, that individual quality, has been exploited and is depleted. People are out of gumption.
So the call is for a return to individual integrity, self-reliance, old-fashioned gumption. The source acknowledges this sounds like something political reactionaries might say, but insists it's about real individual worth, not just justifying inequality.
This is a bit different from Phaedrus's approach, which was more focused on finding a new philosophy, a spiritual rationality with quality above reason. He looked for the historical roots of the problem in the ancient Greeks, blaming their mythos for leading us to value the reasonable over the good.
So wrapping up this deep dive,
Yeah.
we've covered a lot of ground. The raw experience of the motorcycle trip versus the car.
That fundamental clash between classic and romantic ways of seeing.
The whole intense, tragic story of Phaedrus and his pursuit of this undefinable quality.
How these big ideas connect to practical things like motorcycle maintenance, logic, and getting stuck with the gumption traps.
And how it all weaves through that difficult, evolving father-son relationship.
Yeah, the core conflict seems to be that split between reason and quality, thinking versus feeling, classic versus romantic. The whole narrative feels like an effort to understand that split and maybe find a way to bridge it.
It really shows how a specific journey, a motorcycle trip, can become this amazing lens for looking at huge questions about how we perceive things, what reality is, what we value.
And it keeps coming back to the importance of building and cultivating quality with a capital Q in everything we do. Work, thinking, relationships.
So maybe final thought for you, the listener, to chew on, something from all this material.
If quality really is the track that directs the train of our collective reality, and if we recognize it through a non-thinking process and intuition,
What does that mean for how we navigate a world that increasingly relies on formal logic, analysis, defined categories? Are we missing something fundamental by prioritizing the rational map over the quality territory?
and if the ugliness we sometimes feel, especially around technology, isn't in the thing itself, but in our relationship to it, a relationship often lacking quality, lacking
Yeah.
gumption,
Yeah.
how can we change that relationship? How do we find the art within the technology, rediscover the value in making and fixing, and rebuild that sense of individual worth and engagement? That seems to be the challenge the sources leave us with. How do we get our gumption back?